He didn't knock. He never knocked. Dorian Vale walked into the hospital records office at 11:47 p.m., straightened his cufflinks, and told the clerk on duty to delete a woman's file. Not her name, not her address. Everything. Prenatal records, blood type, the birth certificate of a child who didn't yet know his father was one of the most dangerous men alive. The clerk hesitated for exactly 4 seconds. Then Dorian placed a photograph on the desk. The clerk's daughter, walking to school, eating lunch, laughing with her friends. She has such a happy life, Dorian said. Every record was gone by midnight. 7 years later, a boy named Nolan Rowan was helping his mother stack peaches at a farmer's market outside Seattle, completely unaware that the man who erased his entire existence from official history was still alive, still powerful, and still absolutely certain that love, in any form, was the most dangerous vulnerability a man in their bloodline could carry. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them felt like losing your own name, this story is for you. Before we begin, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. Give us a like if this one moves you, and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to where everything unraveled and somehow, impossibly, began again. The Saturday morning ritual was the only religion Maris Rowan had left. 4:15 a.m., the alarm. She didn't slap it. She just opened her eyes and lay there for a few seconds in the dark, listening to the sound of her farm the way other people listen to the ocean. The irrigation lines ticking, wind moving through the orchard. Somewhere above her, on the second floor, Nolan sleeping with his arms thrown wide the way he always did, taking up more space than any 7-year-old had a right to. She got up, made coffee she barely tasted, pulled on jeans and the green canvas jacket she'd owned since before Nolan was born, and went out to load the truck. The baskets didn't arrange themselves. The labels didn't print themselves. The honey jars had to be wiped clean of the previous day's dust before she wrapped them in brown paper, and the heirloom tomatoes, 11 varieties, every one of them stubborn and imperfect and spectacular, had to be sorted by ripeness, not color, which was a distinction that took most people years to understand. Maris had figured it out in her second season. She had learned a lot of things the hard way. By 5:30, Nolan was awake and eating cereal at the kitchen counter, his feet swinging because they still didn't quite reach the floor. He had her dark hair and her stubbornness, and almost none of her face. His eyes were the feature that stopped strangers mid-sentence sometimes. Steel blue. Pale and clear and unusually direct. The kind of eyes that seemed to be measuring something you hadn't finished saying yet. People told her they were striking. She always said thank you and changed the subject. "Can I carry the honey today?" he asked. "You said that last week and dropped 2 jars." "I was tired last week." "You're always tired in the morning." "Mom." He said it the way only 7-year-olds can. A single syllable loaded with the full weight of injustice. "I'm 7 now. That's different." She handed him his jacket and his water bottle and his job, which was holding the clipboard and acting serious while she checked off inventory. He was actually quite good at it. He had always been good at tasks that required him to feel important. She had no idea where that trait came from. She told herself she didn't think about that. The drive to the market took 22 minutes on the back road she preferred. She didn't like the highway. She didn't like moving fast through open space where she could be seen from too many directions at once. She had lived long enough with that particular instinct to stop questioning it. It was just part of her, the way the green jacket was part of her, the way the early mornings were part of her. A habit built on top of an old wound she had covered so carefully that most days she almost forgot it was there. The Cedarwood Collective Farmers Market occupied a wide gravel lot between a grain elevator and a row of old storage buildings on the outskirts of Hillcrest. On peak Saturdays it pulled maybe 300 visitors. Maris had been coming here for 5 years. She knew the gravel vendor who made chili oil with ghost pepper and the older woman 3 stalls down who sold quilts and pretended to sell vegetables. She knew which spot caught the morning light at the right angle and which one flooded when it rained. She set up in the same place every week without needing to think about it. That was the thing about routine. It felt like safety. It felt like proof that you had made something stable out of wreckage. She was unwrapping the last row of honey jars when Nolan tugged her sleeve. "There are a lot of black cars," he said. She looked up. 4 black SUVs were pulling into the far end of the lot, slow and deliberate, the way vehicles move when the people inside them are not hurrying because they don't have to. They parked in a clean line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doors opened. The men who got out were not farmers market people. You could see it in the way they stood. Back straight, eyes moving, that particular stillness that isn't relaxed but is its opposite, coiled. 6 of them. Well dressed in a way that was less about style and more about function. One of them spoke into an earpiece. Another scanned the roofline of the grain elevator. And then the last door opened. Maris's hand closed around a honey jar and didn't let go. He was taller than she remembered, which shouldn't have been possible. She had memorized every dimension of him with the obsessive precision of someone who knew, even while it was happening, that the experience was temporary. Broader through the shoulders, the jawline harder, the dark hair still worn short but differently now, without the carelessness of youth. He wore a charcoal jacket over a black shirt, and he moved with a weight he hadn't carried at 24. That particular heaviness that accumulates when you have been making decisions that cost people something for long enough that it starts to show in your body. Cassian Vale. She had not said his name out loud in 7 years. She had not let herself say it even in her head, not after the first year, not after she had finally understood that grieving a person who was still alive was its own specific type of damage that you had to actively choose to stop doing. She had stopped, or she had believed she had stopped. Her body apparently had a different understanding of the situation because her hands were shaking and she was gripping a jar of wildflower honey like it was the only solid object in the world. He hadn't seen her yet. He was talking to one of his men, his head slightly bent, that old familiar way he had of listening that made whoever he was talking to feel like the only person in the room. She had loved that about him. She had loved it specifically because she had known, even then, that it was a skill as much as a quality, that he turned it on and off deliberately. And she had loved him anyway, which had probably told her something she should have listened to. "Mom, your hands are shaking," Nolan said. "Cold morning," she said. "Stay close." She started calculating. The truck was 40 feet behind her, keys in her jacket pocket. If she moved now, before he turned around, if she picked Nolan up and walked quickly without running, because running drew attention, she could be in the truck and out of the lot before he processed what he had seen. She had done harder things than this. She had driven herself to the hospital alone at 31 weeks and filled out every form without anyone's help, and held her son in the fluorescent light of a room that smelled like antiseptic and told him his name and made herself believe it was enough. She could walk 30 feet to a truck. She set down the jar. She reached for Nolan's hand. And then Nolan, who had inherited her stubbornness and apparently his father's complete inability to be managed, spotted something across the lot. A dog, probably, or another kid, or one of the chili oil vendor's hand-painted signs. And he bolted. Nolan? He was fast. He had always been fast. The kind of fast that was less about speed than about the absence of hesitation, launching himself forward with total confidence in his own feet. He cut between a produce table and a flower stand, laughing at something only he could see, and he was not watching where he was going when he hit the uneven patch of gravel at the edge of the lot, and his feet went wrong. He went down fast. And Cassian Vale, who had turned at the sound of running footsteps because men like him always turned at unexpected sounds, caught him. It was reflex, pure and simple. His arm went out and his hand closed around the back of Nolan's jacket, and the boy swung to a stop like a pendulum, breathless and startled, hovering 6 inches above the gravel. "Whoa," Nolan said. "Thanks." Cassian looked at him. Maris had thought, in the abstract, about what this moment would be like if it ever happened. She had let herself imagine it exactly twice, both times in the first year, both times at night when her defenses were low. She had imagined it going many different ways. She had never imagined what actually happened, which was that Cassian Vale looked at her son's face and went completely, absolutely still. Not the stillness of recognition, not the stillness of shock. Something deeper and more fundamental than either of those things. The stillness of a person whose entire internal architecture has just been rearranged by a single piece of information they didn't know they were missing. Nolan had his eyes. The same unusual steel blue, the same directness, the same quality of assessing you calmly and without apology. Cassian had 4 cousins and had grown up around a dozen men who carried that specific genetic marker. and he was staring at a child who had it with such precise fidelity that there was no available explanation that didn't destroy everything he thought he knew about the last 7 years of his life. He set the boy gently on his feet. He looked up. Maris was already moving toward them, her hand outstretched for Nolan, her eyes on Cassian's face with an expression she was working very hard to control. It wasn't working. The fear was visible, and the grief was visible, and underneath both of those things, the thing she hated most, the recognition was visible, raw and immediate. The way the body responds to someone it has never stopped knowing, regardless of what the mind has decided. "Nolan," she said, "come here." Nolan looked between them. 7 years old and already sharp in ways that occasionally alarmed her, he registered the quality of the silence before he moved. But he moved. He took her hand and pressed against her side, and she pulled him close with one arm and faced the man she had spent 7 years not thinking about. Cassian's mouth opened, closed. One of his men had drifted closer, reading the situation for threat, his hand at his jacket in that way that meant something specific. Cassian made a small motion, 2 fingers, barely, and the man stopped. "Maris," Cassian said. His voice was different, lower. The youth had been sanded out of it by time and whatever he had lived through in the gap between then and now. She had spent 7 years telling herself that if she ever saw him again, she would feel nothing, or she would feel anger, because anger was the productive option. Anger was the option that didn't break you. She felt neither of those things. She felt the specific agony of looking at someone you loved so much that losing them had rewired you at a cellular level, and they are standing 3 feet away, and your son is holding your hand, and there is no version of the next 60 seconds that does not change everything. "Don't," she said. "Maris, I mean it, Cassian." Her voice was steadier than her hands. It surprised her. "I mean it. Do not do this here." "Is he—" "Don't." The word came out hard enough that Nolan looked up at her. She loosened her arm around him, breathed, tried to think. "Just don't ask me that here. Not in front of— just not here." Cassian was looking at Nolan again. She watched him do it and saw the exact moment when looking became knowing, the way a person's face changes when a fact moves from possibility to certainty. There was no question in his expression anymore, just the aftermath of a question answered so completely that the landscape has changed. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for years. I had people—" He stopped, started again, differently. "I was told you were dead." That landed. She had told herself various things about the end over the years, that he had chosen the syndicate over her, that he had wanted out of what they had before she did, and the disappearance had been the kindest option available to him. She had settled on this version eventually because it was the only one that made her feel something other than devastated. It made her feel angry, and anger was survivable. She had not settled on the version where he had been told she was dead. "Who told you that?" she said. His jaw tightened. "That's what I need to find out." One of his men called out something low and terse from across the lot. Cassian's eyes moved to it and back to her with the efficiency of a man who had trained himself to absorb information quickly and act on it faster. "I can't explain everything here," he said, "but I need you to listen to me. I was not looking for you because of— I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know. I came here because there's a man, a financial operative, who's been sheltering under this market's network of vendors for 3 months, and when I find him I'll explain." "You brought guns to a farmer's market," Maris said flatly. He had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable. "They're discreet. There's a child trying to sell me a painted rock next to the peach stand. Do you know what discreet means at a farmer's market, Cassian? It means you didn't bring 6 people with earpieces." Something crossed his face that she hadn't expected. Not offense. Something close to the expression he used to make when she surprised him. That old involuntary admission that he was less in control of his reaction than he would prefer. She looked away from it because it was too much. It touched something that had no business being touched in a parking lot at 8 in the morning. "I need to take my son and go," she said. "And I need you to not disappear again." He said it without the authority of a threat. He said it with something worse, the naked register of a person saying the thing they actually mean. "Because you will disappear again, and I have— Maris, I have enough of my own dead. I cannot add you to that list a second time." Nolan was watching Cassian with that quiet, measuring quality he got when he was trying to understand something. Are you the man who caught me? He asked. Yes, Cassian said. Thank you, Nolan said. I fell pretty hard. My hands aren't even bleeding, though, so... Cassian looked at him for a long moment. His throat moved. You're tough, he said. My mom says I got that from her. Your mom's right, Cassian said. And the word mom came out with a specific weight that Maris felt in her sternum like a struck bell. She started to say something and didn't, started again. A vendor 2 stalls over was watching them with the relaxed curiosity of someone who had nowhere better to be. There's a blue coffee cart at the south end of the lot, she said quietly. It opens at 9. It's loud enough that conversation doesn't carry. She looked at him directly, making sure he understood what she was offering and what she was at. I'll be there at 9:15, alone. Nolan stays with Clara at the quilt stand, and if I see one earpiece, I walk. Cassian nodded once. 9:15. She turned without another word and moved back toward her stand, pulling Nolan with her, and she did not look back because she had promised herself 7 years ago that looking back was the thing she would not do anymore. She lasted about 8 steps. Then she looked back. He was still standing where she had left him, his hands loose at his sides, watching her go. Not reaching for his phone, not consulting with his men, just standing there in the early morning light of a farmer's market with the particular stillness of a man who has just discovered that the shape of his life is entirely different from what he believed it to be. She turned back around, kept walking, pressed her thumb against the corner of Nolan's shoulder where she could feel his warmth through his jacket. She had built 7 years of peace on the certainty that Cassian Vale was lost to her by his own choice. She had spent those 7 years raising a boy with steel blue eyes and had managed, most days, not to think about where those eyes came from. 9:15 was 53 minutes away. 53 minutes to decide how much of the truth was safe to say out loud, how much she could give him without giving him everything. How you sit across from the man who your body has never stopped recognizing as home, and have a conversation that doesn't crack you open all the way down to the foundation you'd spent 7 years laying. She arranged Nolan's invoice clipboard in his hands with unnecessary precision. He held it with the gravity of someone managing serious affairs. Mom, he said. That man looked at me weird. You fell in front of him. Not like that. He frowned at his clipboard. Like the way you look at the pictures in the box under your bed. She stopped arranging things. The box. 3 photographs, a folded note she had never finished reading, and one of those small, smooth stones people pick up at the beach without knowing why. She had told herself she kept it because throwing it away would be a decision that required more emotional energy than ignoring it. She had never looked too closely at that logic. We should check the tomato count, she said. Nolan accepted this. He was 7. He had the diplomatic instinct of someone who had learned which conversations his mother would finish and which ones she needed to walk sideways away from first. He flipped to the tomato page on the clipboard with professional focus. She stood at her stand in the Saturday morning light with 52 minutes left and tried to remember how to breathe correctly. The coffee cart at the south end of the lot was run by a man named Pete, who had exactly 1 speed and it was slow. He ground beans by hand. He frothed milk with the deliberate focus of someone diffusing something. His line was always 6 people deep, and nobody ever complained because the coffee was worth every second of the wait, and because Pete's Market was one of the last places left in the county where nobody was in a particular hurry. Maris got there at 9:12. She ordered without looking at the menu because she always got the same thing and stood with her back to the grain elevator wall and watched the lot. Clara had Nolan at the quilt stand, which meant Nolan was currently either reorganizing Clara's button collection by color or asking questions about quilting patterns that Clara was thrilled to answer at exhaustive length. He would be fine for 40 minutes, maybe longer. Cassian arrived at 9:14, alone, which she noticed. No earpiece visible, which she also noticed, though she was under no illusion that his men were far. They would be close enough. They were always close enough. That was the entire logic of men like them, the permanent invisible perimeter. He looked at the menu for about 3 seconds before giving up on it and ordering black coffee. Pete did not hurry for him. Cassian accepted this without impatience, which surprised her slightly. The Cassian she had known at 24 had carried a particular restlessness, not rudeness, just a constant low-grade forward momentum, as if standing still was something he was always working against. This version of him stood and waited for his coffee with the stillness of someone who had learned, at some cost, how to stop moving. He came and stood beside her against the wall. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Around them, the market was building toward its mid-morning rhythm, voices layering over each other, a child crying briefly about something and then stopping, the smell of kettle corn starting up from the far corner. "You look good," he said. "Don't," she said. He accepted that. "Okay. Say what you need to say." He turned his cup in his hands, looked at the lot, not at her. "I got a letter 7 years ago, 3 weeks after you, after the last time I saw you. It was in your handwriting." Her stomach went cold. "I never sent you a letter." "I know that now." "What did it say?" His jaw moved. "That you had made a deal with Renner Calloway. That you had been feeding him information about our operations for 4 months. That you were taking a payment and relocating, and that you were sorry, and that I should not look for you because looking for you would get me killed." She stared at him. The coffee in her hand was hot through the paper cup, and she gripped it hard because she needed something solid to hold on to. "Cash in." The handwriting was exact. I had it checked, eventually, years later when I had resources to check things properly. Whoever did it had access to multiple samples of your writing. Letters, notes, probably things from when you were at the estate. He finally looked at her. "It was good enough that I believed it. For the first 8 months I believed it completely." "And after 8 months? "Calloway's operation collapsed. His accountant turned informant, and the whole Eastern network went down. In the debrief that filtered back to us, there was no mention of an asset named Maris Rowan. No female informant. Nothing that matched." He paused. "That was when I started having doubts. But by then I'd been told you died. Overseas, a car accident, untraceable." "Who told you that?" The pause before he answered was a fraction too long. "My uncle." She went very still. She had met Dorian Vale 4 times during the year and a half she and Cassian were together. Each time he had been impeccably polite. He had a way of looking at her that she had categorized at the time as wariness, the natural caution of a criminal organization's second most powerful member assessing a potential vulnerability in their heir. She had understood it. She hadn't liked it, but she had understood it, and she had told herself that it was manageable, that it was the cost of loving someone whose world operated by different rules. She had not categorized it correctly. "Your uncle told you I was dead," she said. "Yes." "And you believed him?" "He brought documentation." Something moved across Cassian's face, an emotion she couldn't fully read but that had shame somewhere in its architecture. A death record. Photographs of a gravesite. "At that point I had the letter. I had the fact that you had vanished without any trace I could follow, and I had a man I trusted telling me it was over." He looked down at his cup. "I believed him because I wanted to be wrong about the letter. Because if you were dead, then you hadn't betrayed me, and it was easier. It was a cleaner kind of loss." "A cleaner kind of loss," she repeated. "I know how that sounds." "I was pregnant," she said. "I found out 6 weeks after you disappeared, after your people stopped returning my calls, after the address I had for you stopped working." She kept her voice level with a specific, focused effort. "I was 26 years old, and I had no money and no family close enough to call, and I was 3 months along when I found out the man I had been planning to leave everything for had apparently vanished into the same world he'd been trying to get out of." He wasn't looking at the lot anymore. He was looking at her with an expression she had no name for because she had never seen it on his face before. Something stripped of every layer he normally maintained between himself and the fact of what he felt. "I drove myself to every appointment," she said. "I applied for a vendor license for this market with a swollen belly and a reference letter from a woman I'd known for 4 months. I planted my first orchard in the 2nd trimester. I delivered Nolan at 3:11 in the morning, and the first person to hold him after me was a nurse named Angela, who talked to him about baseball while I stitched up. And I looked at his eyes the first time, and She stopped, started again. I knew exactly what I was looking at, and I made a choice to build him a life that had nothing to do with that knowledge." Cassian's hand came up and stopped short of touching her arm. He pulled it back. "I looked for you," he said. "Not immediately. I thought you were dead for nearly 2 years. But when I started doubting the documents, I looked. For 3 years I had people searching. I had the letter reanalyzed. I followed every lead that went anywhere at all. None of them came here. Someone made sure of that. The trail was erased carefully, professionally. His voice had gone low and precise in the way she recognized from when he was thinking through something that made him genuinely cold. Maris, the level of organization required to do what was done, the forged letter, the fabricated death record, the intercepted communications, the elimination of your records. That's not a rival operation. That's internal. That's someone with full access to our systems and enough patience to run a long operation against two people who trusted them. Dorian, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. She could read the answer in the flatness of his expression, the particular controlled quiet of a man who has arrived at a conclusion so devastating that he is taking care to hold it at a precise distance until he knows what to do with it. I need proof before I move, he said, which is why I'm here. The financial operative I'm looking for, a man named Croft, was Dorian's personal accountant for 11 years before he disappeared 18 months ago. If Croft kept records the way I believe he did, then somewhere in whatever he took when he ran is the documentation trail for everything Dorian has orchestrated in the last decade. He looked at her directly, including what he did to us. And you think he's here? At this market? I think he was using local vendor networks as cover, moving between small agricultural communities, operating in cash, staying beneath any system that would flag him. He paused. I had a name. Marcus Croft. He's been operating under an alias, either Drew Hanlon or Paul Messer, both documented vendors with legitimate histories. Maris turned this over. Drew Hanlon sells organic garlic. He's been here 3 years. He's quiet, doesn't socialize much, always pays fees in cash. She thought about it. I asked him once where he sourced his seed stock, and he deflected to a question about my irrigation system. Cashin was very attentive suddenly. Where's his stall? East Row, between the mushroom vendor and the grain stand. She hesitated. Cashin, if you have 6 men here and you move on him in the middle of a public market with families, no one gets hurt, he said. You don't know that. I'm careful. You drove 4 black SUVs into a farmer's market. That was a miscalculation. It was an arrogant... She stopped herself, breathed. This was not the conversation she needed to be having. What happens after you find him? If he has records, if they prove what Dorian did, what do you do with that? He looked at her for a long moment. What do you want me to do with it? I want my son to grow up in a world where your last name is not a threat to him. Then we want the same thing. She studied his face. She was good at reading people. She had made herself good at it out of necessity, in the years after everything collapsed. She looked for the performance in his expression, the professional sincerity of a man who had learned to say exactly the right thing and mean approximately none of it. She had known men like that. She had watched them operate. She had developed very specific instincts about the gap between what people said and what they were. She didn't find it. What she found instead was exhaustion, real and specific and not managed, the kind that doesn't perform itself because it has stopped having the energy to perform anything. He looked like someone who had been correct about something they desperately wanted to be wrong about, and had been living with that correctness for long enough that it had become its own kind of weight. 9:15 became 9:40, she said quietly. You need to go find your accountant before he notices your cars and runs. Cashin straightened. Will you still be here when I come back? That depends on what you find. He nodded. He was 3 steps away when she said his name. He stopped. When you find him, she said, don't let anyone get hurt, not staff, not vendors, not anyone shopping with their kids today. She looked at him steadily. I know you know how to manage that. I'm telling you it's the condition. Something in his face went very still in a way that was separate from his normal stillness. Understood, he said. She watched him go. Then she poured the rest of her coffee out because she'd been holding it so long it had gone cold without her noticing. She went back to her stand. She sold 3 jars of honey and a flat of tomatoes and had a conversation with a regular customer about heirloom apple varieties that she navigated on complete autopilot. She watched the East Row from her peripheral vision. Nothing obvious happened for 20 minutes, and then it happened all at once. A sudden tightening of movement in the far corner of the lot, 4 of Cashin's men converging on a point with the coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed this specific maneuver, and then a brief commotion that lasted less than 90 seconds before it was completely absorbed back into the ambient noise of the market. Professional. She had to give him that. 15 minutes later, Cassian was back at her stand. "We have him," he said. "Is he talking?" "Not yet, but the drives he was carrying when we found him, Maris, he had 12 encrypted drives on him. 12. Whatever he's been building for the last 18 months, he didn't leave it somewhere else. He's been carrying it with him." "Why?" "Because he's afraid that wherever he left it would be found and destroyed before he could use it." Cassian's expression was controlled, but she could read the thing underneath it. "He says the primary archive is not on the drives. He says he left the full documentation somewhere safe 18 months ago, before he went into hiding. He says it's hidden on a property in this county." "How many properties are in this county?" "He won't say. He says he'll only talk to one person." She waited. "He says he'll talk to the woman who owns the organic farm on Cedarwood Road. He says she saved his life once, and she's the only person he trusts with what he knows." The sound of the market continued around her. The ordinary, layered human noise of a Saturday morning, kettle corn and conversation, and a vendor demonstrating a peeler to two skeptical older women. All of it continuing exactly as it had before, as if this was still a normal Saturday. "He was the man on my road," she said. Not a question. The memory surfacing intact, 6 years ago, early spring, a man she had found collapsed against her fence post with a leg wound he couldn't explain and eyes that were terrified in a way that had nothing to do with pain. She had brought him inside, fed him, let him sleep in the spare room for 3 days while his fever broke. He had left before dawn on the 4th day without saying goodbye. She had told herself he was probably running from a bad situation and that it wasn't her business. "What did he leave on your property?" She thought about the spring that had happened. The 2 weeks of strange sounds from the old foundation area under the north end of the orchard that she had attributed to settling. The section of disturbed soil she had noticed and then rationalized as animal damage. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think I know where to look." He was watching her with an expression she recognized from a long time ago. That quality of full attention he turned on things that required it, the feature she had initially loved and later understood was also the feature that made him dangerous, because it could be turned on anything, and he was very good at deciding what anything meant to him. "He needs to come with us," Cassian said. "To your farm. Today." "Today?" She looked past him. Nolan was visible at the quilt stand, sitting on a crate with Clara, showing Clara something on the invoice clipboard with great seriousness. "Cassian, I have a 7-year-old. "I know." "You're asking me to bring an unknown asset onto my property with my son present, while whatever this is accelerates around us." "I'm asking you to help me find the thing that ends this," he said. "The thing that puts Dorian in front of people he can't manage his way out of. The thing that gives you the life you've been building without someone eventually coming for it." His voice was quiet and direct and without decoration. "Because they will come for it. Maris, if Dorian has been running this operation for 7 years, you have been inside his radius the entire time and you haven't known it. That changes when he finds out Croft is in custody, and Croft's absence from his usual position will be noticed within hours." She looked at him. She looked at the lot. She looked at her son, who was now laughing at something Clara was saying, throwing his head back the way he did when something really landed, completely unaware that the gravitational field of his life had shifted on a Saturday morning while he was counting tomatoes and asking about quilting. "Clara keeps him for the afternoon sometimes," Maris said. "She lives 3 miles from the market." She said it slowly, thinking it through as she said it. "He doesn't know it's not a normal arrangement." "He doesn't have to know anything yet," Cassian said. "He's going to know eventually. Everything." She looked at Cassian directly. "I'm telling you that now so it's not a surprise later. He's 7, and he's sharp, and you don't get to be a secret that I manage around him indefinitely. Whatever happens today, whatever we find, at some point he deserves the truth about where those eyes came from." Cassian went very still. He nodded. "I know." "Do you?" "Maris." He said it differently this time. The way you say a name when you need the other person to understand you are speaking without whatever layer you normally speak from. "I spent 7 years thinking I had a specific shape, what my life was, what I was responsible for, who I owed, and who I was. Today that shape changed." His voice was even, but just barely. I understand that doesn't mean anything to you yet. I understand you didn't have the luxury of processing this at 9:15 over a coffee cart. I'm not asking you for anything except the next 6 hours. After that, I'll follow your lead. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Give me 20 minutes to arrange things with Clara, she said. The drive to Cedarwood Road took 22 minutes. Maris drove her own truck. Cassian followed in one of the SUVs, which she had insisted she would not sit in the back of one of his vehicles on her own property with a man she didn't yet trust wrapped in all the armor of his organization. He had agreed without argument. The man they had recovered from the market, Croft or Hanlon or whatever his real name was, rode with Cassian's team. Croft was smaller than she remembered, thinner. He had grown a beard in the years since she had found him at her fence, and he had the specific quality of someone who had been afraid for a very long time and had made his peace with it, which was its own kind of damage. When she met his eyes over the hood of the truck in her driveway, he looked at her with something she could only describe as relief so profound it had become almost indistinguishable from grief. You didn't have to keep it, he said. Whatever I left, you didn't have to. Most people would have found it and sold it. I didn't know I had anything, she said. He looked briefly surprised. Then he looked around. He was orienting himself, she realized, looking at the orchard, the old foundation wall at the north end, the layout of the property against the layout in his memory. The north end of the orchard, he said, near the second row of pear trees. I put it down 4 feet. There's a concrete form I poured around it. He looked at her. Inside the form there are 6 waterproof cases. Inside the cases are the original physical documents, 62 encrypted drives, and a ledger, handwritten, my handwriting, that catalogs everything Dorian Vale has done since he took operational control 17 years ago. Every murder he ordered, every official he purchased, every record he falsified. He paused. Including the records he had falsified to separate the two of you. I was the accountant who processed those payments. I have receipts for every transaction. The silence in the driveway was very complete. Cassian was standing very still beside the SUV. Maris looked at her orchard, the pear trees she had planted in her second year, the ones she had tended through 2 bad frosts and a drought season, the ones she had sometimes sat under when Nolan was small, in the evenings when he was finally asleep, in the specific, exhausted quiet of a single parent at the end of a long day, sat under them and felt, if not happy exactly, then something adjacent to it. Under those trees, apparently, was the documentation of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. It had been there the entire time. I need a shovel, she said. They found it exactly where Croft said. The concrete form, buried precisely 4 feet in the red clay soil that made her orchard both difficult and extraordinarily productive. It took 2 of Cassian's men 40 minutes to unearth it carefully, and when they cracked it open and the waterproof cases came out, scuffed and damp and intact, Croft let out a sound she had no category for, something between a sob and an exhale. The sound of a man setting down something he has carried alone for so long, the muscles don't know what to do with the absence of the weight. Cassian stood over the open cases without touching them. He looked at the ledger in Croft's hands. He looked at Maris. She stood at the edge of her orchard with her boots in the turned soil and thought about 7 years of believing the wrong story about the man she had loved, about a letter she had never written, about a record of her death that had been filed in a system somewhere and had sat there clean and bureaucratic and entirely false while she was planting orchards and raising a child and believing, on the best days, that she had built something worth protecting. Her phone buzzed. Clara's number. She answered it. Maris. Clara's voice was off. Not distressed exactly, but altered, tightened by something she was working to keep out of her tone. Honey, I need you to stay very calm. Everything in Maris went cold. There are 2 men here. They came to the door about 10 minutes ago. They're being very polite, but they said they're here to collect Nolan for a family visit. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about, but they're still here, and they've been standing on the porch and I don't open the door again, Maris said. Her voice was very quiet. Go to the back room with him. Lock it. Do not open any door until you hear my voice. Maris, what's happening? Clara, back room. Now. She hung up. She turned. Cassian was already looking at her, had already read her face, was already moving toward his men with his phone out and his expression stripped down to something operational and cold and utterly without hesitation. "They have my son," she said. The words came out of her mouth and hit the air and became real in a way they hadn't been while they were still inside her. "Clara's house, 3 miles from the market," Cassian said immediately, already talking. "2 men, on the porch. We move now." I was on the phone, giving an address she hadn't told him, but he apparently already had, because of course he had prepared for exactly this kind of contingency, because this was the world he operated in, the world she had spent 7 years constructing a careful life to stay outside of, and it had found her anyway. It had found her through the same orchard where it had been buried for years. She was in her truck before he finished the order. She had the keys in the ignition before any of his men were in their vehicles. She backed out of her driveway without a 3-point turn because she didn't have time for a 3-point turn because her son was 3 miles away with 2 strangers on a porch and a woman who sold quilts standing between them. Cassian's SUV pulled out behind her. She drove. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, and every molecule of the last 7 years of control and management and deliberate calm stripped completely away, leaving just the part of her that was Nolan's mother. Just that, only that, the thing underneath everything else she had made herself into. And it turned out that part of her was not calm at all. She drove 83 miles an hour on a road with a 45 limit, and she did not care. The truck handled badly at speed. It was a farm vehicle, not built for this, the steering loose and the back end pulling slightly right on curves, and she compensated with both hands and her whole body the way you compensate for something you know intimately, the knowledge in her muscles rather than her head. 3 miles had never felt like 3 miles before. Every tenth of a mile marker she passed felt like a referendum on how fast she had moved, how much time she had wasted standing in her orchard, looking at waterproof cases while 2 men stood on Clara's porch. Her phone buzzed on the seat. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She glanced down. Cassian's number. She answered it on speaker without taking her eyes off the road. "They're still on the porch," he said. His voice was in full operational mode, flat and precise and scrubbed of everything else. "My man who was positioned near the market perimeter got eyes on them 4 minutes ago. 2 individuals, suits, not drawing attention. They haven't forced entry." "Why not?" "Because forcing entry wasn't the order. The order was to establish presence and wait. They're not here to take him. They're here to confirm his location." She felt the distinction land somewhere in her chest like something cold and heavy. "They already know where he is." "They've known for longer than today," Cassian said. "This is a message. Dorian knows I'm here. He knows we found Croft. He's telling us he has reach. He's using my son to tell you that." "Yes." She turned onto Clara's street. A residential road, old houses set back from the street, large yards and mature trees that made it feel quiet and enclosed. She had always liked that about it. She had let Nolan ride his bike here in the summers. She saw the 2 men before she reached the house. They were exactly as Clara had described, standing on the porch, not touching anything, not speaking to each other. The kind of professional stillness that announced itself. One of them saw her truck and said something to the other one. She parked badly, one wheel up on the curb, and got out before the engine was fully off. "Ma'am." The one on the left held up a hand. Well-dressed, mid-40s, the kind of face that had been carefully arranged into a neutral expression for so long it had forgotten any other configuration. "We're not here to cause a problem." "Get off my friend's porch," she said. "We were asked to extend an invitation. Get off the porch." She stopped 4 feet from the bottom step and looked at him with the full concentrated weight of a woman who had driven 83 miles an hour to get here and had nothing left that was interested in civil management of the situation. "Now." The man looked past her. She heard Cassian's SUV pulling up behind the truck. Something shifted in the man's posture. Not fear exactly, but the recalibration of someone who has assessed a situation and found it different from their expectations. He stepped down from the porch. The second man followed. "Mr. Vale," the first man said, addressing Cassian, who had come to stand just behind and to the right of Maris. "Your uncle extends his regards. He asks that you consider the value of a direct conversation before anyone makes a decision they can't take back." "Tell my uncle the conversation already happened," Cassian said. "He just doesn't know it yet." The man looked at him for a moment. He also asks that you remember what you're risking. His eyes moved to Maris, then back. All of it. They left. They walked to a gray sedan parked one house down and drove away without hurrying, which was somehow worse than if they had hurried. Maris went up the porch steps and knocked 3 times, their pattern, and said, "Clara, it's me," and heard the locks coming open, and then the door was open, and Clara was there, 71 years old and visibly shaken, but upright, and behind her was Nolan. I was fine. Standing in Clara's hallway, holding a quilt square Clara had given him to examine, his face carrying the particular expression of a child who has correctly identified that something serious happened without being told what it was. He looked at his mother and then at Cassian standing behind her on the porch, and his expression went through several quick calculations. Maris went to him and held him for a moment. He allowed this with the tolerance of a 7-year-old who has decided to make an exception. She breathed him in, the smell of his hair, the specific warmth of him, the stubborn aliveness of him. "Were those men here about me?" he asked into her shoulder. "No, baby. You're not good at lying," he said. She pulled back and looked at his face. "I know." She stood. "Go get your jacket. We're going home." "Are we going home or are we going somewhere that isn't home but you're calling it home?" She stared at him. "You make a face when they're different," he said. Cassian made a sound behind her that was almost a laugh and stopped itself. She did not look back at him. "Get your jacket," she said. They went back to the farm. Cassian's full team came, 4 vehicles now, positioned at points around the property perimeter that Maris identified without being told, because she had walked her own land enough times to know where the sightlines were, and Cassian's people had identified the same points from a tactical perspective that was its own kind of landscape reading. 2 worlds, same geography. Nolan was installed in the kitchen with the tablet he used for schoolwork and strict instructions to stay inside. He accepted this with the diplomatic compliance of someone who was assembling information and had decided not to spend his leverage yet. She had the sudden vivid certainty that he was going to be exhausting in about 6 years. Cassian's team had transported Croft to the farm. He was in the living room now, at the table, with the 6 waterproof cases open in front of him, and the handwritten ledger in the center and his 12 encrypted drives arranged beside it. He had the focused, slightly dissociated quality of someone operating on the specific adrenaline that comes after long fear. The animal energy that kicks in when you finally stop running and have to deal with what you were running from. Cassian stood across the table from him. Maris stood at the kitchen doorway, where she could hear Nolan moving in the next room and still see everything in front of her. "Walk me through it," Cassian said. "Everything. Start with the beginning." Croft's hand settled flat on the table. "Which beginning?" "Mine and hers." Croft looked at Maris, then back at Cassian. He exhaled through his nose. 17 years ago, when your father was still running operations, Dorian came to me with a specific concern. He said the heir to the Vale position was showing signs of what he called structural weakness. Croft's voice was even, the flatness of someone who has rehearsed this testimony in their head for long enough that the emotion has been filed off the surface. What he meant was that you had formed a serious attachment, a woman who was not affiliated, not vetted, not controllable. He said it needed to be managed before it became a liability. "He said that to you," Cassian said. "He said it to me because I processed payments. I was the person he came to when something needed money and no paper trail. He told me what he needed, and I told him what it would cost, and I—" Croft stopped. His hands pressed harder on the table. "I told him what it would cost, and that is what I have to live with. That I named a price and didn't ask what I was enabling." The room was quiet for a moment. "The letter," Cassian said. "I paid a forger named Lev Martin. He specialized in document fabrication, handwriting replication, official seals, the full suite. He had samples of the woman's writing because Dorian had been intercepting her correspondence for 6 months by that point. Every letter she sent you, every note. He had enough to build a convincing replica of her voice." Croft glanced at Maris again. "I'm sorry. I need you to understand, I didn't know what I was building at the time. Dorian told me it was a financial protection measure, protecting organizational assets." "He told you it was a financial protection measure," Maris said, and the flatness of her own voice surprised her. "He was my employer. I was 29 years old, and I was very good at my job, and I had not yet understood the full scope of what I was working inside. He said it without defense, just the fact of it. That's not an excuse. It's the sequence. What happened to the hospital records? Cassian asked. Croft looked up at him. Something shifted in his expression. A tightening, a recalibration. Which hospital records? Her medical records. The pregnancy? Nolan's birth certificate. Cassian's voice had dropped in register without dropping in volume. They were erased. I found that out 3 years into my search when I was trying to trace any surviving documentation. Someone had accessed the hospital's record system and deleted a patient file. He paused. Tell me that was also you, because if it wasn't you, the list of people with that capacity gets very short and very specific. Croft was very still. That was not me, he said. The air in the room changed. Dorian came to me about the letter and the death record, Croft said slowly. Those were my operations. But the hospital records, he didn't mention a pregnancy. He didn't tell me she was pregnant. He looked at Cassian. He found that out separately. He must have had a source inside the medical system, someone who flagged it and reported back. He stopped, which means he knew about the child. He knew about Nolan, Maris said. Before he was born, almost certainly, Croft said. If Dorian had someone monitoring her and she was visibly pregnant within a year of the separation, yes, he would have known. The sequence of it assembled itself in Maris's head with a cold, terrible clarity. Dorian had not just separated them. He had identified the pregnancy, accessed the records, erased the documentation, and then, what? Waited? Monitored? Let a woman he had identified as a threat raise a child he knew was a Vale heir in deliberate, sustained ignorance? He let you raise him, Cassian said. Not to Croft, to her. He knew. He let you raise Nolan because a child being raised by a woman outside the organization, off the official records, with no documentation connecting him to the Vale bloodline. That child doesn't exist legally. He can't inherit. He can't make claims. He can't threaten Dorian's position. She thought about the box under her bed. The 3 photographs and the folded note and the smooth stone from a beach she had visited with Cassian in their 2nd month. She thought about all the times she had looked at Nolan's eyes and made the deliberate choice to file the knowledge away and not examine it, because examining it led to a door she had decided not to open. The door had opened anyway. The door had been forced. There's something else, Croft said. His hands were doing something on the table, a small, involuntary motion, the fingertips pressing and releasing. She noticed it because she had gotten very good at watching people's hands. Say it, Cassian said. The reason I ran 18 months ago. Croft looked at the ledger on the table. It wasn't just conscience. I found something in the accounts that Dorian hadn't shown me. A transaction stream I wasn't supposed to see, buried in the legitimate agricultural subsidiary, which is part of why he uses farm networks as cover. It was a very large, very old financial arrangement with an organization called the Serrano Group. Cassian's entire face changed. It happened fast, the way faces only change when the name is one that carries specific weight. The Serrano Group is a cartel, he said. International. They don't partner. They acquire. They've been acquiring, Croft said, incrementally, for 9 years. The arrangement Dorian entered into, I can show you the documentation, it was never a partnership. The payments were structured as partnership disbursements, but the underlying agreement, the one I found in the original files, is a transfer. He opened the ledger and turned it to a specific page and pushed it across the table. He sold them the Vale Syndicate 9 years ago, full operational control, on a delayed transfer schedule. The final transfer date is... He put his finger on the page. Cassian looked at it. 4 weeks from now, he said. Which means in 4 weeks, Serrano takes full control of every Vale asset, every Vale operation, and every individual on the Vale payroll. Croft looked up. And based on the Serrano Group's standard practice, when they complete an acquisition, they eliminate surviving leadership, Cassian said. Every member of the organization's founding family. Every potential claimant. The sentence completed itself in the room's silence. Every surviving member of the Vale family. Every potential claimant. A boy in the next room with steel blue eyes and a clipboard he carried with great seriousness, who did not officially exist in any database, but who was, by blood, exactly what that phrase described. He sold us, Cassian said. The word us was very specific. He sold the entire organization to a cartel that will kill everyone connected to it, including me. And then he sold my son. He stopped. The sentence had run into something he hadn't prepared for, and he stopped. Maris stood at the kitchen doorway and looked at the man across the table from Croft, and watched him absorb the fact that the person who had destroyed 7 years of his life and erased his child's existence had done it in service of an endgame that included killing that child. The sound of Nolan's tablet from the kitchen. Some program he was watching, the audio turned low. "He's going to move when he realizes Croft is gone," Maris said. Her voice came out steady, which she found interesting because there was nothing steady happening inside her. "He'll know the documentation is no longer secured. He'll know Croft talked." "He already knows," Cassian said. "The men at Clara's house. That was him reading the situation. He sent observers, not extractors, because he didn't know yet how much we had. Now he does." He looked at his phone. "We have hours, not days." "How many people does he have?" "Enough." Cassian said it simply. "My uncle has been preparing for this transition for 9 years. His people are loyal to him specifically because they know what's coming and they want to be on the right side of the transfer. He's not poorly resourced." One of Cassian's men knocked on the doorframe. She had learned his name in the last 3 hours. Reyes, senior in the team, a man who communicated primarily in economy of motion. "We've got movement," Reyes said. "South Access Road. 2 vehicles holding position about a quarter-mile out." Cassian looked at Maris. She looked back at him. "They're not going to wait long," she said. "No." "Nolan can't be here." She said it with absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when all the variables collapse into a single non-negotiable fact. "Whatever happens in the next 6 hours, he cannot be on this property. I need to get him out first." "Where?" She thought. She thought fast. "There's a woman named Helen Marsh in Bellingham. She was my midwife. She's the only person outside this county who knows anything real about my life here. She's not connected to you, and she's not connected to anything that Dorian would have in his databases because I never used my full legal name with her. I went by my grandmother's maiden name the whole pregnancy." She looked at Cassian. "Can you get him to Bellingham?" "In 2 hours, yes. Without going through the South Access Road." "There's a North Field Gate?" She nodded. "Accesses the county road directly. It's padlocked, but it's my padlock." She turned toward the kitchen, then stopped. "He's going to ask questions." "He asks a lot of questions," Cassian said quietly, and there was something in it, something careful and precise, the way you speak about a person you are still learning to hold, still learning the dimensions of. She went into the kitchen. Nolan looked up from the tablet. He had been watching a documentary about migratory birds, which she filed somewhere in the part of her brain that kept track of things that were inexplicably him, completely his own. "We need to take a drive," she said. "Where?" "To see a friend of mine in Bellingham. You'd stay with her tonight." "Why can't you stay?" She sat down across from him at the table. She looked at his face. She had looked at his face approximately 10,000 times and always seen the same thing, this specific person, hers, complete and entire. Right now she was also seeing the thing underneath that, the inherited architecture of him, the eyes that were not hers. "There are some things I need to handle here tonight," she said, "and I need to know you're somewhere safe while I do it." "Is it about the man who caught me?" She held his gaze. "Some of it is." He looked at the table, then back at her. "Is he my dad?" The question came out flat and direct, the way he asked all questions that mattered, without preparation, without apology, because he was 7 and had not yet learned that some questions were supposed to be built up to. She had 3 seconds in which she could have deflected, made it something smaller, told him it was complicated. She looked at her son's face and found she did not have any deflection left in her. It had been used up somewhere on the drive to Clara's house. "Yes?" she said. He nodded once. He looked at the table. His jaw moved slightly, an expression she recognized as the face he made when he was integrating something, fitting a new piece against the existing structure of what he knew. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I mean, I had questions. I had a lot of questions." He looked up. "I didn't know his name, though. I just knew there had to be one. You said everyone has one, a biological father, even when they're not around." "His name is Cassian," she said. He turned the name over. She could see him doing it. "Does he know?" "He found out this morning." "Oh." Another brief processing silence. "Is he mad?" "No, baby. He's not mad." "Are you mad at each other?" She stopped, started again. It's complicated, in ways that I'll explain when you're older. What matters right now is that I need you to go to Bellingham and be safe and let me handle some things here. He looked at her with his father's eyes. And then? And then I'll come get you and we'll talk about everything, all of it, for as long as you need. He considered this. He was 7. His bandwidth for abstract futures was limited by design, which she was grateful for right now. Can I bring my clipboard? Yes. And the quilt square Clara gave me? Yes. Okay. He got up, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair with the brisk decisiveness he always had when a decision had been made and he was done thinking about it. I'm ready. She drove him to the north gate herself with Reyes in the passenger seat. At the gate, 2 of Cassian's vehicles were waiting to take Nolan through to the county road and north to Bellingham. She had called Helen Marsh from the truck. 64 years old, unflappable, the kind of woman who received unexpected calls requesting unexpected favors and said, "What time?" without requiring explanation. Nolan would be safe. She told herself this. She told herself it as a fact, not a hope. At the gate, Nolan got out of the truck. He was about to get into Cassian's vehicle, and then he stopped and turned back. He looked at Cassian, who had come to the gate to see him off. 7-year-old and a man who ran a criminal empire, standing on either side of a padlocked farm gate in the afternoon light. "Will you be there when she comes to get me?" Nolan asked. Cassian looked at him. "If you want me to be." Nolan thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He got in the vehicle. The convoy moved. Maris watched the taillights until the county road bent and took them out of sight. She turned back to the farm. The 2 vehicles on the south access road had not moved. They were waiting for darkness, she thought, or for orders, or for whatever signal Dorian gave when he had decided that waiting was no longer serving him. "Tell me about the Harvest Festival," Cassian said, coming to stand beside her. She looked at him. "What?" "The annual market event. Next weekend. Dorian's going to move before the evidence can be transferred out of our hands. He knows that window, and he's not going to move on this farm while we have perimeter coverage. He'll pick the moment of maximum advantage, maximum crowd, maximum confusion, maximum collateral complexity." He looked at the south road. "He's going to wait for the festival." "That's a public event. Hundreds of people." "Exactly." She thought about the festival, the way the market transformed for it. Double the vendors, the old grain elevator lit up at night, food trucks along the perimeter, families with children and folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. The market at its most open and its most crowded and its least controlled. "He'd use civilians as cover," she said. "Make it impossible for you to respond without creating damage." "Yes." "That's monstrous." Yes. She looked at her farm, her orchard. The pear trees with their turned soil, the empty concrete form sitting beside the hole her son's inheritance had been buried in for 6 years. The irrigation lines ticking in the late afternoon quiet. Everything she had made out of nothing. "There's something I need to tell you," Croft said from the farmhouse doorway behind them. His voice had a new quality in it, lower, the quality of someone who has been building towards something and has decided it can no longer be delayed. They both turned. He had the ledger in his hands again. He had it open to a different page than before. "I said I found the Serrano transaction 18 months ago, and that's why I ran." He looked at Cassian. "That's true. But there's another reason I ran. Something I found in the same file structure." He looked down at the page. "There's a secondary transfer agreement, not operational assets." He paused. "Personal assets." "What does that mean?" In the Serrano Group's organizational vocabulary, personal assets refers to human leverage. People who can be used for control or elimination. He turned the ledger and held it out. Dorian submitted a list to Serrano 9 years ago. People within the Veil extended network who represented either value as hostages or risk as potential opposition. People to be managed in the transition. Cassian took the ledger. He read the page. His face changed in a way Maris had not seen before. Not the controlled operational blankness he used when receiving bad information. Something that moved under the surface of that in a way he couldn't fully manage. He handed her the ledger. She read it. Her name was on the list. Not her assumed name. Not the identity she had built here. Her full legal name, Maris Annalise Rowan, and beside it a notation in the tidy accounting shorthand Croft used throughout the ledger. Known location confirmed. Child confirmed. Asset classification, dual leverage. Dual leverage. Her and Nolan. Both of them, classified in a cartel's transition document as leverage to be managed. Confirmed. Known location. He's known where we are, she said. For some time, Croft said quietly. The confirmation notation has a date. He touched the page without taking it back. 14 months ago. She looked at the date. 14 months ago, she had replanted the south end of the orchard following a late frost. She had been out there every morning for 2 weeks, by herself, in the early hours before Nolan woke up, alone in an open field on a rural road. For 14 months, she had been a confirmed known location in a cartel's acquisition ledger. And she had been going to a farmer's market every Saturday and driving the back roads because she didn't like moving fast in open space. And she had made herself believe, that the instinct was old and residual and not based on anything current. Her instinct had been current. Her instinct had been exactly right. He didn't move on you because you were more useful in place, Cassian said. His voice was stripped down to pure operational precision, which she understood was how he managed the thing underneath it. As long as you were here and stable, you were leverage he could use against me whenever he needed it. The moment I found you today, that calculation changed. He can't use you as dormant leverage anymore, which means his only remaining option is to activate you as a direct play. The men at Clara's house were a message, she said. The men at Clara's house were a message, he confirmed. The next contact won't be. She stood with the ledger in her hands in the afternoon light of her farm, the farm she had built, the orchard she had planted, the life she had constructed with the specific, patient, exhausting labor of a person who refused to let one catastrophic loss be the end of everything, and understood, with the cold completeness of a person absorbing a truth that changes the shape of everything, that Dorian Vale had known where she was for 14 months, had classified her child as leverage, and had been waiting with the patience of a man who operated on decade-long timelines for the exact moment when using her would cost Cassian the most. That moment was now. The vehicles on the South Access Road were still holding position in the fading light, and the Harvest Festival was 6 days away, and somewhere in the structure of a cartel's transition agreement. Her son's name appeared beside a word that meant he was useful as long as he was vulnerable, and she stood in her orchard and felt something in her that had been carefully maintained for 7 years. The part of her that was measured and deliberate and controlled, the part that drove back roads and woke at 4:15 and kept a box under the bed instead of opening it. She felt that part of her go very quiet, and something older and less managed took its place. She handed the ledger back to Croft. She looked at Cassian. I need to know everything about the Harvest Festival layout, she said. Every entrance, every exit, every sightline from every rooftop, and every place in that market where a man with operational experience would position people if he wanted to control the outcome of an event and minimize the possibility of organized response. She held his gaze. Because if he's going to come for us there, then we need to already be there first. Cassian looked at her for a moment. In the 7 hours since he had stepped out of a black SUV into her Saturday morning, she had watched him recalibrate multiple times, absorbing information, adjusting position, managing the gap between what he had believed and what was true. Each time he had done it with the controlled efficiency of long practice. This time he looked at her with something that was not controlled at all. Okay, he said, and the last available version of the quiet life she had built closed behind her like a door she would not be able to find again from the other side, and she walked back into her farmhouse to plan the thing that came next. The 6 days between that conversation and the Harvest Festival were the longest of her life and also the most compressed, hours disappearing into logistics and planning sessions and the specific exhaustion of a person running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular adrenaline that has no off switch once it's engaged. Cassian's team relocated to the farm. Maris gave them the barn and the outbuilding and didn't ask herself whether this was a decision she would have made differently if she'd had time to think about it, because she hadn't had time, and the question was therefore irrelevant. Croft stayed in the spare room with the documents locked in a case that never left his immediate vicinity. Reyes ran perimeter rotations. 2 of Cassian's other men, she learned their names, Holt and Declan, worked the intelligence side, monitoring Dorian's known communication networks for any signal that indicated accelerated timeline. The signal came on day 4. A movement of assets. 3 vehicles repositioning from Dorian's primary Seattle location toward the county. Not arriving. Positioning. He's pre-staging, Cassian said. They were at the kitchen table with the festival layout printed across it. The actual printed vendor map the market organizers published, annotated now in 3 different colors of pen. He wants people in place before the event opens, before we can establish counter-positioning. So we establish it tonight, Maris said, at a closed market. I have a vendor key. I've had one for 4 years. I'm on the market board. She looked at him. I know every inch of that layout in the dark. He looked at her. He had been doing this repeatedly over the past 6 days. That particular look, assessing and something else, something she was not examining directly because she did not have the bandwidth. Maris, say what you're going to say. I'm going to say that you don't have to be in the field for this. I know that layout better than any of your people. Yes, but that's not the only reason you want to be there. She looked at the map. At the grain elevator marked in the northeast corner. At the cold storage warehouse marked in blue near the south entrance. At the maze of vendor stalls that she could navigate at a dead run in the dark if she had to. No, she said. It's not the only reason. He nodded slowly. Okay. She looked up. Okay? I've watched you think through 3 operational problems in the last 4 days, and you were right on 2 of them and more right than me on the 3rd, he said. I'm not in the business of wasting capable people. A pause. But you take a radio, and you tell me where you are at all times. Same goes, she said. Something moved across his face that was almost the expression she remembered from a long time ago. The involuntary one, the one that meant she had surprised him in a direction he preferred. She looked back at the map. She did not examine that either. On the night before the festival, she called Bellingham. Helen answered on the 2nd ring and put Nolan on without being asked, because Helen was that kind of person. Mom. Hey, baby. Helen has a dog. Her name is Biscuit, and she is very large. That sounds about right. Mom. A shift in his voice, the register he used when he was being serious. Is everything okay? She was sitting on the porch step of her farmhouse in the October dark, looking at the orchard. The trees were losing their leaves now, the late-season sparseness that always made them look more structural. The architecture revealed when the surface was stripped away. It will be, she said. You say it will be when things are not okay currently. When did you get this perceptive? I was always this perceptive, he said. You just weren't paying attention. She sat with that for a moment. Her son's voice in the dark. The orchard going quiet. Cassian is going to be there when I come get you, she said. I want you to know that going in. A brief silence. Okay. It's going to be complicated for a while between all of us. I need you to be patient with complicated. I'm good at complicated, he said. You always said I was good at complicated? I said you were complicated. That's different. He laughed. Briefly, the real laugh, the one that went all the way up. Then it settled. Mom, come get me soon. Tomorrow evening, she said. Whatever happens tomorrow, I will be there tomorrow evening. She said it as a promise, and promises to her son were the category of thing that she did not make unless she intended to keep them at whatever cost was required. The Harvest Festival opened at 7 a.m. By 5:30, Maris was already inside the perimeter. She had come in through the service entrance on the north side at 4:45, in the dark, moving through the vendor staging area with the quiet efficiency of someone who has loaded and unloaded this market approximately 260 times. She knew which boards in the staging platform creaked. She knew which corner of the grain elevator cast the longest shadow at sunrise. She knew the cold storage warehouse's secondary access point, a loading door on the east face that the facilities manager kept unlocked during festival days for vendor overflow. She was not there as a vendor today. She had arranged for her stall to be covered by a neighboring farmer. A favor she had asked without explanation, and that had been granted because farmers' market relationships operated on accumulated goodwill, and she had spent 5 years building it. Her stall would open at 7, with tomatoes and honey and heirloom apples and no Maris Rowan standing behind the table, and almost nobody would find that strange. Cashin's team was distributed across 7 positions. She knew where each of them was because she had placed them on the map herself, drawing from her knowledge of the layout sightlines and Cassian's knowledge of Dorian's tactical preferences, where a man with his operational experience would position people if he wanted coverage without visibility. The grain elevator roof, the south entrance loading dock, the two positions flanking the historic market building's east and west exits, the food truck corridor along the northern fence where natural crowd movement would funnel people in a predictable direction. Croft was not at the festival. Croft was in a federal building in Seattle with two of Cassian's lawyers and the full contents of the 6 waterproof cases, in the process of an evidence transfer that had been arranged in the last 48 hours through channels Cassian had built over years for exactly this kind of contingency. If everything went wrong today, if Dorian got what he came for, it would not matter because the documentation would already be in federal hands. That had been Cassian's decision. Made at 2 in the morning on day 5, at the kitchen table over cold coffee, stated flatly and without fanfare. The evidence goes to federal authority before the festival, not after. If I don't come out of this with Dorian in custody, the evidence still ends his operation. She had looked at him across the table. You're planning for a version where you don't come out of it. I'm planning for all versions, he said. That's the job. She hadn't slept well after that. At 6:15, the first vendors began arriving. By 6:45, the lot was filling, trucks and trailers and folding tables, and the organized chaos of people who did this every week knowing exactly where things went. The festival added a layer to it, extra vehicles, the food trucks positioning along the north fence, the event staff in their orange vests moving through with clipboards and radios. The grain elevator was being lit with the string lights the market board had voted in 3 years ago over the objections of 2 vendors who thought it was excessive. Maris had voted for the lights. She positioned herself inside the historic market building, a long, high-ceilinged structure of old timber and corrugated metal that ran the length of the lot's east side. During festivals, it housed the premium vendors, the ones with established waiting lists for stall space. She found a position near the east exit, behind a pillar, where she had sightlines to 3 of the 7 entry points and could reach the grain elevator stairwell in 90 seconds at a walk. Her radio was in her jacket pocket, earpiece in. The channel was Cassian's team frequency. She had been given it on day 2 without ceremony, Reyes handing her the equipment and running her through the protocols with the brisk efficiency of someone who assessed competence quickly and adjusted accordingly. 7:03. The festival opened. The crowd built fast. That was the thing about the Harvest Festival. It didn't ramp up gradually. It arrived because people had been waiting for it and had planned for it and arrived with the specific energy of an annual event that meant something to them. By 7:30, the lot was dense with movement, voices, the smell of kettle corn already going in the corner and someone's mulled cider heating nearby. Families with strollers, older couples walking slowly with canvas bags, groups of women with coffee cups, children running ahead of adults who called after them without real urgency. Good people. Her people. The people she had been selling tomatoes and honey to for 5 years. At 7:47, Reyes's voice came through the earpiece. East Service Road, 3 vehicles. They're not festival traffic. Her pulse ticked up 1 notch. Copy, Cassian said through the radio. His voice was level. Hold a position. Let them commit to entry. She breathed, looked at the crowd moving through the historic building. A woman was buying a jar of cherry preserves from the vendor 20 feet away, negotiating cheerfully over the price. An older man was examining hand-thrown pottery with the concentration of someone making an important decision. North fence, Holt's voice. 2 on foot, moving toward the food truck corridor. Copy. Grain elevator, Declan. I've got a rooftop position on the neighboring structure, southeast corner, 1 individual. That one mattered. A rooftop position meant a long gun. That was the variable she had been most worried about. Crowd coverage from elevation, designed to create panic and movement in a specific direction. She had told Cassian on day 3 that Dorian's most effective play would be controlled chaos. Not a direct assault, but a managed panic that drove people toward specific exits, while his people used the movement as cover for extraction or elimination. Declan stays on the rooftop position, Cassian said. Priority. 8:02. The crowd was at peak density now. The festival's opening hour always was, before people spread out through the lot. The historic building was warm with bodies, the old timber walls holding the heat in. Her radio crackled. They're moving. Reyes, not a held position anymore. All three vehicles, East Service Road, they've stopped short of the lot entrance. Personnel dismounting. How many? A pause. 8 confirmed, probably more. 8. Against cash-in 7 positioned people plus herself. Not a favorable equation, and she had known it going in, which was why the plan was not a fight. The plan was a funnel. Get Dorian to a single position before his numbers could be an advantage. Get him isolated. Get the confrontation one-on-one where Cassian held the leverage. The problem with plans was the point at which they met a variable they hadn't accounted for. The variable arrived at 8:17 in the form of a sound she had not heard outside a movie. The specific flat crack of an explosion, close enough to feel in her chest, from the direction of the south entrance. Not a large explosion. A precise one. Something designed not to destroy but to create immediate, total panic in a crowd. She felt the pressure wave more than heard it. She saw the moment it reached the people inside the historic building, the way it passed through them like a current. The instant translation from Saturday morning contentment to something animal and immediate, and then every person in the building was moving. Delivery truck at south entrance. Reyes's voice came through tight and fast. Remote detonation. Vehicle fire. South gate is blocked. People moving north. His voice cut out. She heard something in the background and then static. Reyes. Cassian's voice. Reyes, report. Static. She was already moving. Through the tide of people pushing toward the north exits, moving against it, pressing through shoulders and elbows, keeping low and steady. She had the layout, and they didn't. She knew that every person in this building was going to funnel toward the north exits, because those were the marked emergency exits, and human beings in panic moved toward signs, toward familiarity. And Dorian's people were going to be waiting in the food truck corridor that those exits emptied into. She turned east instead, through the service door at the back of the building that was not a marked exit and that most people in the building had no reason to know existed, through the utility corridor that ran behind the vendor stalls, out into the service alley between the historic building and the grain elevator. The alley was empty. Outside the building, the sound of the festival's panic was everywhere but removed, screaming at a distance, the sound of the crowd moving in mass, a car alarm that had been triggered by the blast pressure. She pulled the radio. Cash-in. South entrance is compromised. Crowd is funnel moving toward north corridor. That's a trap. Your people on the north fence need to reposition now. East service alley is clear. A beat. Then his voice, slightly rougher than before, a quality in it she hadn't heard all week. Copy. Where are you? East alley, between the building and the elevator. I need you to stay. Reyes is down or compromised. The rooftop position on southeast structure. Declan needs backup. Maris, I know the elevator stairwell access. Cassian, I know this building. Let me help. 3 seconds of silence that cost her something to wait through. East roof access. 60 seconds. Don't engage until I have eyes on you. She moved. The grain elevator's exterior stairwell was on the alley-facing side, a metal structure that switch-backed up the exterior of the building to the roof access door 4 stories up. She had been on this roof twice for market board events, and she knew the door was keyed to the same vendor access key she carried. She hit the first landing at a run, the metal stairs clanging under her boots, and she was 3 flights up before she registered that her legs were burning. 4th flight. The roof access door. She got her key out without slowing, which meant she fumbled it the first time and had to stop, hands against the door, breathing hard, make herself go slow for the 2 seconds it took to get the key seated and turned. The door opened. She came out onto the grain elevator roof into the thin morning light and the full panoramic sound of chaos below. The crowd noise, the fire at the south gate still burning, the screaming that had the specific quality of mass panic, not targeted injury, the sound of a lot of people who are frightened and moving, and the man on the adjacent rooftop, southeast corner of the neighboring structure, who had a rifle and had not yet used it. She could see why. The crowd's movement had not yet reached the pattern Dorian wanted. The people were spreading too much, not funneling the way the plan required, which meant the shooter didn't yet have a clean vector to create the directional panic that would drive people toward the north corridor kill zone. He was waiting for positioning, for the crowd to compress. He didn't see her. She was on a different roof, lower, with the elevator's water tank structure between them. She pulled the radio. Shooter is still waiting. He needs the crowd to compress before he fires. If we can redirect crowd movement away from the north corridor, he never gets his vector. Working on it, Cassian said. His voice was closer now. He was moving. Holt is rerouting at the west exit. I need 2 more minutes. You have maybe 1. 1 it is. A sound, impact, something physical, a grunt, and then his voice came back tighter. I've got Dorian's people between me and the elevator, 3 of them, working through it. Working through it. Which meant 3 men between him and her with the specific intention of keeping them separated. She looked at the shooter across the rooftops, looked at the crowd below, which was doing what crowds did, following the path of least resistance, which was currently taking them exactly where Dorian wanted them. She made a decision that she had not planned and that she did not examine before she made it. She left the cover of the water tank and walked to the east edge of the grain elevator roof. Below her, directly below, was the east alley. But the alley connected to the main lot at its north end, and from the roof's east edge she had a partial sightline to the north corridor's entrance, the choke point where the crowd was being funneled. She could also see Dorian. She almost didn't recognize him from above. She had met him 4 times and had catalogued his face with the precision she applied to anything she considered a threat, but she had never seen him from this angle, standing at the north corridor's entrance in a gray coat flanked by 2 men, watching the crowd move toward him with the detached patience of someone observing a process he has engineered and trusts completely. He was not hiding, he was standing in the open, because the crowd was his cover. He was just another man in a gray coat at a farmer's market, and if anything happened in the next 3 minutes that required a witness, 200 panicked people would say they had seen nothing clearly. She keyed the radio. Dorian is at the north corridor entrance, gray coat. He's not hidden. He's using the crowd. Cassian's voice came back strained. I see him. I can't get there. I've got... The sound of something that was not a conversation. Impact. Movement. I'm 30 seconds behind. 30 seconds was 30 seconds too long. Because the crowd was compressing now, the natural physics of mass panic driving people toward the narrowest exit point, and the shooter on the southeast rooftop had shifted. She could see him adjusting his position, tracking the crowd's movement, finding his vector. She had no weapon. She had a radio, a vendor key, and the knowledge of this layout that she had accumulated over 5 years of Saturday mornings. She ran to the west edge of the grain elevator roof. The festival's string lights had been strung from the grain elevator's west face to the top of the historic market building, a decorative installation that crossed the main lot at a height of about 30 feet, thick cable with bulb clusters every 4 feet, tensioned and bolted into the elevator's faceplate and into a bracket on the market building's roof. The market board had hired a structural engineer to approve the installation. Maris had read the engineer's report because she was on the board, and that was her job. Rated load capacity, 800 pounds. She was 137. She looked at the cable, looked at the crowd below, looked at the distance. She thought about Nolan in Bellingham asking her to come get him soon. She grabbed the cable with both hands, swung herself off the grain elevator roof, and went. The friction was immediate and specific, and exactly as bad as she had expected. The cable burning through her palms, even through her jacket sleeves, the momentum carrying her faster than she'd calculated. The wind in her face, and the crowd noise rising up to meet her, and the lights swaying with her weight in a way that the engineer's report had probably not specifically addressed. Below her, the crowd at the north corridor entrance. Directly ahead, the market building's roof bracket. She hit the bracket too fast and had to let go and landed hard on the market building's roof on her left side, shoulder and hip, the impact driving the breath completely out of her body in one moment of total white blankness. She lay on the market building's roof for approximately 2 seconds. Then she got up. Because there was not an option that involved staying down. Her left shoulder was wrong. Not broken, she didn't think, but badly enough impacted that her left arm was not fully responding. She could move it but couldn't trust it. She moved to the roof's edge and looked down. She was directly above the north corridor entrance, directly above Dorian Vale. She still had her radio. She keyed it. I'm on the market building roof, north end. I'm above the corridor entrance. I'm directly above him. She breathed. Cassian, I am directly above your uncle. A silence that lasted less than 3 seconds and felt like longer. Hold, he said. I'm 20 seconds out. Hold. She looked down at the man in the gray coat. He had not looked up. Nobody ever looked up. That was one of the consistent, reliable facts about human beings in crisis. They looked at the crowd, at the exits, at each other. They did not look at the rooftops. Dorian was watching his plan unfold with the calm satisfaction of a man who had been patient for 9 years and was watching the mechanism engage at last. He had his phone in his hand. He was either monitoring his team or preparing to give the signal to the shooter, the go order that would create the directional panic that would transform a crowded farmer's market into an operational battlefield on his terms. She had his phone number. She had gotten it from Croft's records on day 3. Not a primary number, a secondary line Dorian used for what Croft called field coordination. The number had been in the ledger. She had photographed it. She pulled her phone with her right hand, dialed. Below her, Dorian's posture shifted almost imperceptibly as his secondary phone buzzed. He looked at it, an unknown number. He would let it go to voicemail. A man in his operational position would never answer an unknown number during an active event. He didn't answer. She waited for the voicemail tone, and then she said into the phone, her voice completely level, "Your accountant is in a federal building in Seattle right now. The documentation transfer started 40 minutes ago. Whatever happens in the next 5 minutes, the evidence is already out of your reach. You've already lost." Below her, she watched Dorian go still. And at the North Corridor entrance, coming through the crowd with the specific directional efficiency of a man who had navigated through 3 of his uncle's people and was not interested in stopping, Cassian Vale appeared. Dorian turned. The 2 men flanking Dorian moved toward Cassian. Cassian did not slow. He took the first one at the shoulder and turned him, a redirection that used the man's own momentum, and the man went down into the crowd in a controlled way that created space without creating additional panic. The second one Cassian caught at the wrist and held, using the physical grip to pull himself forward rather than engaging, covering distance, not fighting. The goal was the man in the gray coat and everything else was obstacle. Dorian had his phone to his ear, calling the shooter, calling someone. Cassian reached him. He put his hand on Dorian's arm, not a grab, a placement, and said something close and low that she couldn't hear from the roof. She watched Dorian's face change. The satisfaction didn't disappear. It was not the kind of face that surrendered satisfaction easily, but something underneath it shifted, a recalculation running fast behind the eyes. Dorian looked up. He looked directly at her. She was on the roof of the market building with a bad left shoulder and her hair in her face from the cable transit and her palms burned from friction, and she looked back at the man who had erased her from a system and classified her son as leverage and spent 9 years building a mechanism designed to end everyone she had ever loved. Dorian said something to Cassian. She couldn't hear it. Cassian's grip on his arm tightened visibly. Then, from the southeast rooftop, a shot. Not into the crowd. Into the air. A single crack that silenced the immediate area around the corridor entrance as people froze and then began moving again faster, more panic feeding the existing current. The shooter had fired a warning round or an abort signal or something she didn't have the code for, and she understood a second later what it meant when Dorian smiled. The shot was a signal, not to create panic, to call in a final resource. "Cassian," she said it into the radio, loud. "He has another play." The shot was a signal. I heard it. Strained, he had Dorian by the arm and 2 men pressing toward him from the corridor crowd. "Maris, I need you to—" The cold storage warehouse. She understood it a half-second before Cassian did. Heard the thought complete itself with the cold click of a layout she knew better than anyone. The cold storage warehouse at the south entrance. The one with the secondary loading door on the east face that she knew was unlocked during festival days. The one she had identified 6 days ago as the position she would use if she wanted a fallback holding location in the middle of a crowded event. Nolan was in Bellingham, but Dorian didn't know that. Dorian's information was 14 months old. His documentation said known location, known child. His plan would have included a contingency for leverage extraction. Someone sent to the location where the child would be most predictably found on a festival Saturday. The farmer's market. At the cold storage warehouse. Where every previous festival, Nolan had helped his mother with overflow inventory. "The warehouse," she said. He sent someone to the warehouse for Nolan. She was already moving back across the market building roof before she finished the sentence, left shoulder screaming and right hand on the radio, and the complete internal silence of a person who has reduced the entire world to a single point and is moving toward it with everything she has. She came down from the market building roof through the interior stairwell, not the exterior. The exterior faced the crowd, and she didn't have time to navigate bodies. The stairwell was a utility shaft, unlit, smelling of old timber and dust, and she took it at a controlled run with her right hand on the railing and her left arm held tight against her body, because every time it swung free, the shoulder sent a white spike up through her neck that made her vision blur at the edges. Third floor landing, second, first, service door to the utility corridor. She hit it with her right shoulder and came out moving east. The utility corridor ran the full length of the building's back wall. At its east end, it connected to the service alley she had come through earlier, and the service alley's south end opened into the lot near the cold storage warehouse. 60 yards, maybe 70. She had walked this path with produce carts and pallet jacks, and in the dark before sunrise so many times that her feet knew it without consultation from the rest of her. She could hear the festival's chaos muffled through the building walls. The screaming had changed character, less immediate panic, more the sustained alarm of people who didn't know whether to keep moving or stop. Someone had a megaphone. She couldn't hear the words, just the quality of the sound, the tone of organized management cutting through the noise. Cashin's people, she thought. Holt or Declan or someone establishing crowd control on the open frequency. She came out of the alley's south end, and the cold storage warehouse was 30 feet ahead of her. She saw the man at the loading door immediately. He was positioned the way people position themselves when they are expecting to receive something, facing inward, weight forward, the specific readiness of a person waiting for a handoff. He was Dorian's. She knew it from the suit, the earpiece, the same template as the men who had stood on Clara's porch. He hadn't seen her yet. She was coming from the wrong direction, from the north, and he was watching the east approach. She did not slow down. She picked up a pallet dolly from the stack against the warehouse's exterior wall. Heavy, wheeled, the kind of industrial equipment that had no softness in it anywhere. And she walked directly at him, and when he turned at the sound of the wheels, she was already too close for him to recalibrate, and she drove the dolly's nose into his knees. He went down hard on the gravel. Not down and out. Down and swearing, which meant she had 6 seconds before he recovered his operational footing. She didn't try to fight him. She stepped past him through the open loading door into the warehouse. The cold storage warehouse in festival mode was not refrigerated. The units were off for the event, and the space was being used for vendor overflow and equipment storage. It was dim, lit only by 2 utility lamps someone had strung near the main entrance, and it smelled like rubber and cold concrete and the ghost of decades of refrigerated produce. She saw 2 things simultaneously. She saw a second man, positioned near the main entrance on the far end of the warehouse, phone to his ear, turning toward her movement. And she saw Nolan. He was standing in the center of the warehouse space between 2 equipment stacks, still wearing his jacket from Bellingham, still carrying his clipboard, looking at the man near the entrance with the particular flat expression he got when he was deciding whether to be frightened or furious and had not yet committed to either. He was not in Bellingham. He was here. "Mom," he said, with the specific tone of a child who has been in a situation for some time and is relieved to have adult backup, but also has thoughts about the situation. The man near the entrance had his hand inside his jacket. She was between him and Nolan, and she did not move from that position. "Nolan," she said, very even, "how are you here?" "Helen's car broke down on the interstate. She called the market, and someone said you'd already come in early. We were going to surprise you." He looked at the man with the hand in his jacket. "These men said they were here to help, but they haven't been very helpful so far." The man's hand had stilled inside his jacket. He was reading the situation. She could see him doing it, the rapid assessment of a professional encountering a variable he had not been briefed on. The instruction had been to secure the child as leverage. The child was secured, but the child's mother was now between him and the exit, and the sounds from outside suggested that whatever Dorian had planned for the next 10 minutes was not unfolding cleanly. "Whatever Dorian told you the plan was," Maris said, "the plan has changed. The man who gave you this order is currently being held at the North Corridor entrance. The documentation your organization was trying to suppress has been in federal hands for 40 minutes. She kept her voice level, kept her body between him and Nolan. "You can walk out of this warehouse right now, or you can stay and be part of what happens next. That's the only choice you have that I'm offering." His eyes moved past her, calculating exits. She didn't move. Behind her, she heard the loading door and then Reyes's voice, close and controlled. Federal agents are on the perimeter. I need hands where I can see them. Now. She felt rather than saw the man's calculation complete. The hand came out of the jacket empty. He put both palms up. Reyes moved past her. She turned to Nolan. He was looking at her left arm, which she had been holding against her body since the roof. Your arm is wrong, he said. I know. What happened? Long story. She crossed to him and put her right arm around him and held him with the controlled grip of someone who is not going to lose it in front of their child and is applying every available unit of will toward that goal. He pressed against her side without ceremony. He was shaking slightly. She felt it through his jacket, the fine tremor that comes after adrenaline has processed and the body sends the bill. He had been afraid. He had managed it because he was his mother's son, and managing things was the primary skill she had modeled for 7 years, but he had been afraid. Are the men outside gone? He asked into her shoulder. Getting there, she said. Is Cassian okay? She didn't know yet. He's working on it. The radio in her pocket. She keyed it one-handed. I have Nolan. Warehouse is secure. What's your status? Static for 3 seconds. She counted them. Then Cassian's voice, rougher than it had been, carrying something in it that was either exhaustion or the specific aftermath of physical effort, or both. North Corridor, Dorian is in custody. Federal contact is on site. A pause. Are you both? He's with me, she said. He's fine. A silence that lasted long enough to mean something. Okay, Cassian said. Just that. The single syllable carrying more than it would have earlier in the day, before everything that had filled in the space between then and now. She stood in the cold storage warehouse with her son and waited for the next part. It took 40 minutes for the perimeter to consolidate and another 20 for the scene to be formally handed to the federal agents who had arrived with the precision timing of people who had been briefed in advance and had been waiting for the activation signal. Croft had given them the timeline from Seattle. The evidence transfer had included operational information about the festival play, enough for a federal response team to be staged 2 miles out at 6 a.m. and move on the signal. That had been the part of Cassian's plan he had not fully told her about until afterward, standing at the North Corridor entrance with Dorian in federal custody beside him and the festival's chaos being systematically contained around them. You didn't tell me there were federal agents staged outside, she said. I knew you'd want to factor them into the positioning plan. I should have been able to factor them into the positioning plan. Yes, he said. You're right, I'm sorry. She looked at him. The apology was direct and unqualified, and she had not been expecting either of those qualities, and it moved something in her that she set aside for later. Dorian was being led to a federal vehicle. She watched him go. He was not performing dignity. He walked with the controlled carriage of a man who has not yet accepted that the calculation has completed against him, who is already restructuring his understanding of what resources he still has and what moves remain. That was, she thought, the specific danger of people like him. They did not experience defeat as defeat while it was happening. They experienced it as a revised problem set. He passed close enough that she could see his face. He looked at her, not at Cassian, at her. You built something real, he said. I'll give you that. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. I did. They put him in the vehicle and closed the door, and that was the last time she ever saw Dorian Vale's face outside of a courtroom. The shoulder was not broken. Badly separated, the urgent care physician told her 2 hours later, with a supporting lecture about the difference between bravery and structural recklessness that she received with the patience of a person whose adrenaline has fully processed and whose arm is in a sling and who has no remaining bandwidth for additional information. Nolan sat in the chair next to the exam table and held her right hand and did not say anything for almost 10 minutes, which was unprecedented in the recorded history of Nolan Rowan. Then he said, Were you scared? Yes. You didn't look scared. I had things to do. He considered this, turned her hand over in both of his. I was scared, he said. In the warehouse. I wasn't going to say anything because the man was watching, but I was. I know, baby. Is it bad that I was scared? It means you're paying attention, she said. Scared is just your body telling you something matters. He thought about that. What matters enough to be that scared about? She looked at her son, 7 years old, sitting in an urgent care exam room in a jacket that was slightly too big for him because she always bought a size up, and he grew into things faster than she expected. His clipboard was in his lap. He had carried it through everything, through Clara's house and the drive and the warehouse and the aftermath. The clipboard with his market inventory forms on it, because he had picked it up in the morning expecting an ordinary Saturday and had carried it through a day that was not ordinary at all. People, she said. The right ones. That's what's worth being that scared about. He nodded like she had confirmed something he had already suspected. He went back to looking at her hand. Cassian was in the waiting room when the physician cleared her to leave. He stood when she came out with Nolan, and there was a moment in which the geometry of the three of them in that space was very particular. The specific silence of people who have not yet found the shape that fits what they are to each other. Nolan solved it by walking directly to Cassian and holding up the clipboard. I have all the market inventory from this morning, he said. Mom's stand is going to be short because she wasn't there. We should probably make a note. Cassian looked at the clipboard. At Nolan's face, something passed through his expression that she had not seen before, and that she recognized anyway, the way you recognize things that are very old and very specific to you. Good thinking, he said. Let's make the note. He sat down in a waiting room chair and Nolan stood beside him with the clipboard, and they went through the inventory together, Cassian asking questions that were the right questions. Not condescending, not performed interest, just actual engagement with the thing Nolan was showing him. And Maris stood in the doorway of the urgent care waiting room with her left arm in a sling and watched them. She didn't think about the 7 years. She had spent enough time with the 7 years. She looked at what was in front of her instead. The weeks that followed were not simple. They were not simple in the way that nothing real is simple, which is different from being complicated in the dramatic sense. The federal proceedings against Dorian Vale were extensive and required testimony and documentation and the sustained attention of lawyers whose fees she did not understand and did not pay. Cassian handled that in the methodical way he handled most practical things, with efficiency and without requiring her to be grateful for it. The Vale Syndicate's legal dissolution took longer than its operational collapse, which happened within 2 weeks of the festival, as Dorian's remaining loyalists assessed the available futures and chose the one that didn't involve being accessories to federal racketeering charges. The Serrano Group's acquisition fell apart the moment the underlying transaction documents became part of the federal evidence record. An international criminal organization purchasing an American criminal organization was the kind of thing that attracted the attention of agencies with more resources than Dorian had anticipated, and the Serrano leadership had enough operational problems of their own without adding documented evidence of acquisition planning in American federal courts. They withdrew. The transfer that had been scheduled to occur in 3 weeks simply did not occur. The mechanism Dorian had spent 9 years engineering collapsed in the space of a fortnight, with the anticlimactic efficiency of structures that turn out to have been load-bearing on a single point. Croft testified. Everything he had documented was verified. Everything he had documented about the forged letter, the fabricated death record, the erased hospital files, the 14 months of surveillance and classification, all of it became part of a record that was public and permanent and not subject to revision. Nolan's birth certificate was reinstated. Not the one that had been erased, a new one, generated through a process that took 6 weeks and 3 separate filings, and which Maris sat through with the focused determination of someone who has decided that bureaucratic process is the appropriate vessel for a specific kind of fury. His name was recorded. His parentage was recorded. He existed in the official record of the world in a way he had not, technically, since before his birth. She did not tell him about the erased records until he was older. Some things had their right time. She told him about Cassian on a Tuesday evening in November, at the kitchen table, without preamble. She sat across from him and said that she wanted to tell him things properly, as much as she could, without simplifying them into something they weren't. He listened with the attention he brought to things that mattered. He asked 3 questions. The third one was, did you love him? She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about it. Yes, she said. I love him. Past and present both. That's something I'm still figuring out how to hold. Nolan looked at her for a moment. Is figuring out how to hold something the same as being scared because something matters? She stared at him. I'm just asking, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe, she said. Maybe it's in the same family. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to the migratory bird documentary he'd paused on his tablet when she'd said she wanted to talk. Cassian came to the farm on a Saturday in December, the first Saturday since the festival that he came without a reason beyond the reason of wanting to be there. And Maris let him in without making it a decision, because some thresholds you cross by stopping in front of them long enough that moving forward becomes easier than not. He stood in her kitchen and drank coffee that was not from a cart and was perfectly adequate. She stood across the counter and they were quiet in the way you are quiet with someone when the silence is not something that needs to be managed. Nolan wants to learn to drive the tractor, she said. He's 7. He wants to learn. I didn't say he was going to. Cassian turned the cup in his hands. The gesture she recognized from the coffee cart, the one she had not let herself catalog at the time. I want to be here, he said. Not in a way that asks you to pretend the 7 years didn't happen. Not in a way that needs you to. I don't need you to forgive what wasn't forgivable. I just want to be here, if that's something that fits. She looked at him across the counter. She thought about the box under her bed, the 3 photographs and the unread note, and the smooth stone from a beach she had been to when she was happy, in the specific way you are happy when you don't know yet that it is temporary. She had kept the box for 7 years without examining her reasons. She thought now that she had kept it because some part of her had never believed the version where losing him was his choice, had never fully committed to that story, had held a small quiet reserve of doubt about whether the shape of the thing was what she had been told it was. The shape had not been what she was told. The box was still under the bed. She hadn't moved it in all the weeks since. She thought she might take it out soon, not to go through it dramatically, not to make it into a scene, just to look at the things inside it with her current eyes and decide what she wanted to do with them. There's a harvest board meeting in January, she said. I'm going to need someone to watch Nolan for 3 hours on a Tuesday. He was very still for a moment. Then, I can do Tuesdays. It's not every Tuesday. I can do some Tuesdays. She picked up her coffee. Okay. They stood in the kitchen in the December quiet and drank their coffee, and outside the orchard was winter bare, the structure of it visible in the way it only was in the months without leaves. The actual shape of what had been planted and tended and grown, all the surface stripped back to the bones of it. She had always liked the orchard in winter. She had always thought it looked more like itself. The first time she brought Nolan to meet Cassian formally, not the market, not the urgent care waiting room, but a deliberate arranged occasion, the 3 of them at a table with food on it, and the explicit understanding that this was what it was on a Sunday afternoon in early January. Cassian had chosen a restaurant that was not impressive, which she had appreciated. Somewhere ordinary. Good food, wooden tables, nobody performing anything. Nolan ordered a burger and ate approximately 2/3 of it while asking Cassian questions in the methodical sequence of someone who had prepared. He asked where Cassian grew up. He asked what Cassian's favorite animal was. Cassian said he had never particularly thought about it, and Nolan found this answer unsatisfying but accepted it. He asked whether Cassian knew anything about migratory birds, to which Cassian said not much, to which Nolan said he could teach him. At some point during the meal, Maris looked at the 2 of them across the table. Cassian was showing Nolan something on his phone, a photograph, she couldn't see of what, and Nolan was leaning forward with his elbows on the table in the posture she was always telling him was bad manners, and they were talking in the focused way of people who have found a shared thread and are following it. She looked at them and felt something that she could not name with any single word. Not happiness exactly, or not only that, because the word happiness did not have enough room in it for all the things that were also present, the 7 years and the grief and the fury and the specific exhausted pride of having built something real in the wreckage of something that was taken. She felt all of that, and the thing underneath it that had survived all of that, which did not have a simple name either, but which was present and warm and not fragile. Not the way things are fragile when they are new and untested, but the way things are not fragile when they have been tested thoroughly and are still there. Nolan looked up at her. He had a piece of something on his chin, which she indicated with a gesture, and he wiped it with his sleeve instead of his napkin, which was a battle she had been losing for 2 years and had more or less accepted. He grinned at her. She thought about a farmer's market in October. A boy running fast with total confidence in his feet. A man who turned at the sound of unexpected movement because men like him always turned. The way a second can contain everything that comes after it. In February, the federal indictments against Dorian Vale were formalized across 11 counts. The proceedings would take 2 years, the attorneys said, which was the nature of cases with this volume of documented evidence. The thoroughness of Croft's records, the very quality that made them so comprehensive, also made the legal process of entering them exhaustive. Maris read the summary filings when they were made available and felt the specific strange sensation of watching 7 years of her life organized into formal language. The forged letter, the fabricated death record, the erased hospital files, the surveillance, the classification of her child. All of it described in the flat, precise syntax of legal documentation, verbs in the passive voice, the enormity of it compressed into clause structures. She read the filings once. She did not read them again. Croft received a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. He called her once, from a facility number she didn't recognize, 2 months after the indictments. She answered because she had decided, in the weeks after the festival, that there were things she was not going to spend her remaining energy on, and cataloging exactly how much she was still allowed to feel about Marcus Croft was one of them. He said, "I'm sorry." Just that. At first. Then, "I know that doesn't do anything useful." She thought about it. "No," she said, "but I'm glad you said it." There was a silence. "The orchard," he said. Did it? "It's fine," she said. "The pear trees are fine." She could hear him let out a breath. "Good," he said. "Good." She hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment and then went outside because the early spring was doing something specific to the light in the late afternoon that she had been watching for all winter. The particular angle that came back in March, the way it moved through the bare branches of the pear trees and hit the turned soil of the rows in a warm, low, lateral way that meant the season was about to change. She stood in the orchard in the March light and looked at her trees. She had planted them in grief. She had tended them alone through 2 bad frosts and a drought. She had sat under them in the dark in the specific exhausted quiet of a person doing it all alone and told herself it was enough. She had believed it some of those nights. She had really believed it. It had been enough. The years had been enough. Had been their own thing, complete and real, not a waiting period for something else. She did not want to reframe them as less than what they had been. And they had also not been the end of the story. She thought those 2 things could both be true. She thought she was getting better at holding things that were both true at the same time. The box came out from under the bed on a Saturday morning in April, before sunrise, in the quiet before the alarm. She sat on the floor with it in her lap and opened it. The 3 photographs. She looked at each one. In the third one, she was laughing at something, and Cassian had caught her mid-laugh on someone else's camera, and she looked young and completely unself-conscious in the specific way you look when you do not know yet that the moment you are in is one you will carry for 7 years. She looked like someone who believed things would turn out a particular way. She set the photographs aside. The folded note. She had not finished reading it 7 years ago, and then had never gone back. She unfolded it now. It was in her own handwriting, something she had written to herself in the first winter, in the middle of the night when Nolan was small and everything was very hard, and she had needed to write something down to make it real. The note said, "You are building something. It doesn't look like anything yet. Keep going." She sat with that for a while. Then she folded it back and put it in the box, and put the stone from the beach on top of it, and put the lid on. She put the box on the shelf instead of under the bed. That was all she did with it. Sometimes that was the whole gesture, moving a thing from where you'd been hiding it to where you could see it. In June, at the summer opening of the farmer's market, Nolan carried the honey jars without dropping any. He was 8 by then, which he had told her repeatedly was substantially different from 7 in ways that she was obligated to recognize. She had recognized them with the seriousness they deserved, which was substantial. He was, in fact, different at 8, slightly taller, slightly more contained, still relentlessly curious about migratory patterns, and still carrying his clipboard and still asking questions that hit her sideways when she least expected them. Cassian came at 9:15. He had been doing that, arriving at 9:15 on market Saturdays when he was in the county, not every week, not with a schedule imposed on it, just when it worked. He brought coffee from Pete's cart, which meant he waited in Pete's line, which meant he had learned to wait in Pete's line, which told her something. He brought the coffees to the stand, handed her one, looked at Nolan rearranging the honey jars in a sequence that was not the sequence she had specified, but that had its own internal logic. The second row should have the darker honey at the front, Cassian said. Nolan looked up, considered this, moved 3 jars. Better, he said. Much better, Cassian said. Maris looked at her stand, her baskets, her tomatoes in 11 varieties, her honey and her apples and the small chalkboard sign she refreshed every week in her own handwriting, the market building with its string lights and the grain elevator beyond it catching the early sun. She thought about all the Saturdays that had been before this one. She thought about the first one after Nolan was born, when she had come here alone at 5 a.m. with a 3-month-old in a carrier against her chest, because she could not afford to miss a selling day, and she had set up her stand in the dark while he slept against her sternum, and she had looked at what she had arranged and thought, okay, this is what it is. And she had meant it. She still meant it. She just meant more things now. The Saturday crowd was building, families arriving, the regular customers coming to the stand with their canvas bags, saying hello to Nolan by name because they had watched him grow up here, season by season, a consistent feature of their Saturday mornings. Maris handed a jar of wildflower honey to a woman who had been buying it from her for 4 years and took the exact correct change without being asked, and she watched the market fill with people and light and the ordinary, extraordinary noise of a morning where everyone had somewhere to be and was exactly there, and she thought, this is what survives. Not the clean version, not the version without the 7 years, or the grief, or the specific long damage of a lie maintained by someone who believed love was a structural weakness. Not the version where none of it happened, the version where all of it happened and you kept going anyway. Where you planted trees in the wrong season and they grew. Where you drove 83 miles an hour on a back road toward your son and your hands didn't shake on the wheel because you did not have room for shaking. Where you crossed a roof on a cable because the calculation was simple. This is what I will do, because the alternative is not available to me. Where a boy with his father's eyes looks up from a clipboard and grins at you with a piece of something on his chin, and you feel, in the full complicated weight of that moment, that the sum of everything it cost was worth what it purchased. Nolan tugged her sleeve. Mom, customer. She turned, smiled, said good morning the way she had said it every Saturday for 5 years. And the market opened around her like a season changing, slow, inevitable, exactly on time.